All right, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Jen and CK and I guess many others for inviting me to join this conference. My topic today is on corporate social responsibility in China, and I, as you can see, I put a question mark behind the title because after the discussion of in the morning, I can't help asking myself, what is really hard law and soft law? So what's the criteria we use, okay, to judge whether a particular piece of instrument should be categorized hard or soft law? And I used corporate social responsibility, CSR, as a case study, okay, to illustrate how hard law and soft law, okay, play out in this particular area. Well, in China, if you look at the law in the books, you might get the impression that we have hard law, okay, on a corporate social responsibility, perhaps to your surprise. Now, we have corporate governance code for listed companies, unlike the situation in other jurisdictions from Germany, for example. This corporate governance code is issued by the securities regulator. In other words, a governmental agency, CSRC, China Securities Regulatory Commission, rather than stock exchange. Okay. And under the legislative system in China, the rule issued by the CSRC has the force of law. In other words, this is law in every sense, okay, on the Chinese legislative hierarchy. So it's not soft law in the sense that it's indeed made by a body which has the competence to issue binding, okay, rules. According to Chapter 6 of this corporate governance code, and I reproduce the original Chinese text, and of course I also provide English translation. As you can read, the last sentence, blah blah blah, place high value on corporate social responsibility. Okay, it does not define or provide any further guidance, okay, of what constitutes corporate governance. But if you still have any lingering doubt as to the nature of this rule, okay, or corporate governance, okay, then company law cannot be mistaken. Article 5 explicitly provides for that the corporate social responsibility, bear social responsibilities. Okay, so very clearly, okay, stipulated in national law as well as rules issued by regulatory body. Now then comes the question. So is a soft law or hard law? As I said, on the surface, this requirement is enshrined in national law and regulatory rules. So it seems like it's a hard law, okay? But, and actually if you read the, look at the wording of the relevant provision, it actually uses the word should, okay? This connotes like a mandatory, okay, requirement, so you should do this. But again, if you read the actual words of that provision, okay, the preamble of the corporate governance, it says the code sets out the main criteria for assessing if a listed company has a good corporate governance structure, and if a listed has serious problem in relation to corporate governance, the CSRs will order it to rectify the problem according to this code. In other words, the regulator, okay, has power, okay, to ask you to rectify if you deviate, okay, from the requirement. And the company law similarly use the word must, Okay, again, it smacks of mandatory requirement. Okay, and as I said, this is a national law issued by the National People's Congress. However, the the CSR provisions in both instruments are couched in very general terms, and there's no precise definition of what constitutes corporate social responsibility. Therefore, it's very difficult to enforce it in practice. Okay, and I refer back to I think you, Brony, said I can borrow the criteria used in the morning as a software, and I noticed there's one thing is saying this one depends on the interpretation of third party, right? So I guess because there's no legal definition of this important term, so it's open to interpretation of many different bodies. So I guess this will be like a third party thing. I guess for enforcement of corporate social responsibility, you would need to look to other enforcement apparatus, including direct duties and the information disclosure. Now, I have no intention to go into details on the issue of direct duties. Just very briefly, in China, we have codified fiduciary duties of directors, in company law. But again, the company law simply make reference to the term duty of care. Okay, in Chinese we call 勤勉义务, duty of care, without giving any further guidance on the contours of this important duty. So it's up to you to imagine, what it is in practice. So this does not provide any further guidance, on this. And if I can go a bit further, on this important issue, we always make reference to the UK direct duty in the 2006 Companies Act. That one makes reference to company's success, and but according to many commentators, they said actually this does not substantially change the picture of fiduciary duties in UK either, because that simply codify what has already been there, in common law. So I guess the point here is it will be very difficult, or close to impossible to rely on direct duties to enforce this one as a form of hard law, Now, the main mechanism to enforce corporate social responsibility at the moment in China is the requirement of information disclosure, And I think this is close to soft law provision, because basically you do whatever you like and just disclose. There's no requirement you need to, for example, donate this amount of money each year. You have to, take care of your employees in any particular way. You just disclose, and this will be up to the judgment of the market. So that's the idea of soft law. So I will now turn to CSR information disclosure, or called CSR reports. Shanghai Stock Exchange in 2008 issued this notice or rules, basically about how to strengthen the corporate social responsibility, and give you some guidance as to how to prepare reports. Section 3 of this particular document basically encourage companies to disclose, prepare CSR reports. And from this one, just encourage, please note that word. It's not required, just encourage. But from 2009, 3 types of companies are required, legally required, so mandatory to disclose. And this affects about 260 companies, at that time. 3 types of companies are included. The first one, the company included in corporate governance sector, Second one, issued shares in overseas jurisdictions such as H shares, for example, companies duly listed in Hong Kong. the issue company, shares in Hong Kong, and the shares called H share because named after the place they listed, Hong Kong H. Okay, that's the first letter of Hong Kong. And the financial companies. So these three types of companies are required to prepare CSR reports. Now for Shenzhen, we have two national stock exchanges. Now we turn to Shenzhen, just across the border. It issued a guidance in 2006, but that one already now repealed. Okay, now this one is the current one, guideline of the Shenzhen Stock Exchange for the standard operation of listed companies on the main board, issued in 2010 and revised in 2015. According to this section, it's still voluntary disclosure. Okay, voluntary disclosure. But from 2009, companies including Shenzhen 100 index are required to disclose. This affects about 100 companies. This one is basically the successor to this one. Okay, so because this one already repealed, so I will not talk about this. So the point here is, from 2009, okay, certain companies are required to prepare CSR reports. So now I will draw on empirical findings, okay, of others. I haven't done any empirical in this one. As Jill said, actually there is a wealth of empirical studies, okay, on the relationship between CSR reports and the performance of certain companies. And now, according to those empirical studies, few companies disclose voluntary, okay, because as I said, this is still optional for most companies. Now, from 2011, there's a study. In 2008, only 27 companies issued CSR report. That means all of them were voluntary because there's no mandatory requirement until 2009. Okay, so that's why it's not surprising to see there's a big jump. Okay, in 2009, close to 400 companies issued CSR report. This is not because in that particular year those listed companies improved their ethical standard. Okay, that's rather because they are not required to disclose. Okay, so that explains this sudden jump. Okay, in number of CSR reports, and then in the following year continue to grow. Okay, to close to 500, but only represented 30% increase. And 2011 continue to grow, but the growth rate slows. Okay, 10% increase. And it's still, overall, less than 25% of listed companies disclose CSR reports, and most of them were those required to disclose. In other words, those companies which are not required to disclose are still very reluctant to disclose. Okay, so as a matter of fact, this has not become like a disclosure culture. Okay, most of them disclose simply because they have no choice. Now,
do you have anything more recent from 2000?
Yes, we'll discuss it. The form of disclosure, we don't have a standardized requirement like this for the way in which you disclose. So you can disclose those CSR related information scattered in annual reports. Okay, probably this bit, everything. Or you can have a special chapter, okay, titled perhaps CSR in your annual reports. Okay, and you can also prepare standalone or separate CSR reports. But most companies use the first one, okay, scattered, and this, as you can imagine, very difficult for people to piece, together the big picture, because you have to look at this part and that part, okay, and then make your own assessment. Now, timing usually, because most of them disclose in annual report, so usually will be on an annual basis. And the interim report, yes, there are, but not very often. Now, the most serious problem, okay, with a CSR report is quality. Okay. Now, we have seen over the years, okay, there has been a steady increase in the number, okay, of CSR report. And of course, there's some problem, but most important of all is the quality. If you read those CSR reports, they're just full of boring cliche and empty, those words, okay. Basically, I guess for them, just use as like a PR, materials. And actually, probably you noticed this morning there's some music playing. That's my fault. But because I wanted to show you something, okay, because I can still show you, but I don't know how to put this on the screen. That's the CSR report, okay, made in like an electronic form by a company, which is very entertaining. In this one, basically say we have done this, we have done that, in an animated form. I guess, and they send them around. I guess they think, okay, this is something we can show off, okay, and as advertisement to increase their publicity. Now, not much useful information, okay, just to talk about how great they are, basically, okay. And for example, like a carbon, very pressing issues, or very sensitive issues, like carbon emission and food safety. Those issues are conspicuous by their absence, okay, in those reports. And hard to compare because there's no uniform disclosure format requirement. Okay, so you disclose this, you disclose that. So it's hard to make a meaningful comparison between those reports. And the worst of all, those information is not very reliable. Okay, not very reliable. According to a 2015 study, okay, just last year, only 10% of CSR reports were audited, and even within this 10% cases audited 10%, less than half, that means less than 5%, okay, audited the reliability of information disclosure. So that means less than 5% of the CSR report have auditors, okay, audited the or sent, okay, or the reliability or the truthfulness of the information disclosed therein. And the production process of the CSR report is also problematic. According to some anecdotal evidence, usually they will will outsource this one to outside firms, sometimes like advertisement and PR firms, okay? So you will see those CSR report made very beautifully, like a glossy magazine, as I said, like those very entertaining mobile software, I guess they think that's good, that's why they send it around, okay? So basically for that purposes, now reasons and the solutions, okay? So that's the problems. Now why? I guess the first reason because it's voluntary, okay, our soft law approach. Intuitively, can we make it more mandatory? So can we clarify that relevant CSR information may be material information that should be disclosed by all, okay? And more incentive to encourage voluntary compliance. For example, you should tie this to subsequent financing right and other benefit, for example, like government procurement. So provide some economic incentives, okay, for them to comply. For business people, as the video clip showed in the morning, the only language business people understand is money, right? So you have to use this one, okay, as a carrot, okay, to incentivize them to comply with this. For example, if you comply with CSR requirement, you will have priority or preferential treatment when it comes to refinancing. In China, if you want to do refinancing, you need to get approval from CSRC. So I guess CSRC can use this one as a criteria, okay, for such applications. And also the government can do something similar like this. And no uniform disclosure requirement, okay, that's why it's very difficult to compare, okay? So I guess CSRC perhaps can issue a uniform disclosure rule. Now we have two stock exchanges, Shenzhen and Shanghai. They both, okay, issued their guidance, and they are not fully harmonized. CSRC as the national securities regulator is particularly well positioned to do this, I guess. So you can stipulate, for example, substance or the timing or format, for example. Of course, this can be done according to the industry or some special needs of a particular company. But the point is there need to be something, okay, from the regulator, okay, to make that more standardized and therefore more comparable, and a better regulatory framework. It might be good if CSRC, for example, or CSRC or stock exchange establish special specific regulatory unit, okay, for CSRCs, and then coordinate with other relevant bodies as agencies for environmental protection. Now, the final, if I can, I spend a couple of minutes on this more vigorous enforcement. I guess this might be too radical, okay, at this point of time, because as I mentioned before, the biggest problem with the CSRC report is the reliability of the information. So this is essentially misrepresentation or misdisclosure, misstatement problem. I have done empirical research on misstatement cases in China, okay, now a couple of years ago. None of them arose from misstatement of CSR information. All of them financial information. Okay, for example, you inflate your earnings, inflate your profit, things like this. But if you say things, okay, I donate this amount of money to this company, but actually I never done that, would that be a misstatement? And would this give rise to legal liability? Things like this. So if possible, can we, for example, deal with that kind of problem within this grand misstatement, okay, legal framework as well? But as I said, I imagine there will be legal problems, particularly for non-disclosure, because under the current financial information disclosure regime, there's an affirmative duty, okay, for the company to disclose information. If you fail to disclose, okay, you face legal liability. But here, we basically use voluntary approach. Okay, but at least I think if you disclose false or misleading information, okay, that should give rise to legal liability. Okay, and I think this is something the regulator, okay, should strengthen in the future. And I hope to see cases, okay, where the issuer, okay, punished for disclosing, for example, false or misleading information in relation to their corporate social responsibility. Okay. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much. I will be happy to take any question you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin, for this precise insight, precise Chinese situation, and especially for your opinion. Your questions, please.
Hi, Robin. Thanks very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it very much. So I often teach Chinese corporate social responsibility as part of my corporate social responsibility class. So I'm delighted to get all of this information to update what I say in class. So my question to you is actually on your last point where you talked about enforcement. So your suggestion is that we have greater enforcement for false or misleading information. So I'm going to suggest to you an alternative. So normally I would totally be in favor of hardening law in this area. But disclosure, particularly on non-financial issues, is an area in which companies don't have very much knowledge. So we see this on a regular basis in other jurisdictions. So for example, if I look at the US practices that are governed by the SEC, they introduced a couple of years ago information on requirements for climate change disclosure. So what happened in the beginning is that when companies were asked to provide information on climate change, they did things like, we have 2 cars, or we have 2 trucks, which obviously is not very good information. One might even say that's sort of misleading information. Obviously there's much more relevant pieces of information that were out there. So what the SEC did was that they provided greater information as to how to properly disclose information on climate change. And so they saw a greater, I guess, increase in the quality of information after they provided that guidance. So instead of moving to enforcement, my question to you is, could we not have some sort of an interim solution where there's just greater guidance provided to companies? This is how you actually disclose information on non-financial issues.
Yes, I appreciate your suggestion. Actually, my suggestion actually is actually both ways. As you can see, I suggest that CSRC, for example, should give more guidance as to for the material information, and also in relation to the form in which the information should be presented. And so basically just you provide guidance, okay, for the company to comply, okay, with the requirement, but you fail, and then there will be stiff, more vigorous enforcement, so like ex ante and ex post. But I appreciate your your advice. That's very good. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm interested in any case law that there is on disclosure law in China. So you mentioned that there have been some cases. Were the
Yes.
prosecutions successful outside of corporate social responsibility? So in relation to financial disclosure, there have been
Yes.
instances?
Yes, I can send you my article. That's
okay, good.
2013 American Journal Comparative Law. Basically, they are just for the first 10 years, okay, of the after the introduction of the civil liability. We have of course we have many cases, okay, of on a misstatement of financial information. That's for sure. And that one is about civil liability arising from a misstatement. But as just mentioned, all of those cases, okay, arose from like a misstatement of financial information, but not this. This.
Sorry, that's typical across most jurisdictions.
That's typical, right? Yeah. But this is also actually this has been a very topical issue even on internet, particularly like China, you know, that like has, you know, very eventful in the past, like a earthquake, you know, many like disasters, right? And then the companies may promise, okay, I will donate this amount of money to this one, but actually they may default it on for whatever reason. So this raised actually moral as well as legal issues. For example, would that promise, you know, would be like breach of contract? So that's of course to look at this from a contract law perspective. But if you also mention this in your CSR report, will this also be a company law or securities law stuff issue, right? So my point here is, okay, because if we regulate this through company law, that may have or may generate more deterrence. Because if it's contract law, it just means you need to perform, you know, have a specific performance, right? But if it's a securities law, okay, because the regulator may come, okay, they have power to impose other types of penalties. And I think this is fair because you benefit from this. You say this already, and then you get a good publicity. So I guess you should take responsibility for that.
No need for the microphone, thank you.
Yes.
So have you found any study that look at the perception by investors of these reports, just to see if in fact there is real damage to investors that rely on that information and CSR information?
Very good question. Well, if memory serves me right, I have not come across any empirical study examining the influence of CSR report on the decision-making process of investors. Usually those empirical studies done by economists, okay, very, very typical. This one is your report, okay, just okay, read and assign value. And this column, okay, that's your price, share price, and then correlation, okay. That's so-called quantitative empirical analysis. They do not really look at the way in which this affects the mindset of investors in a qualitative way. I guess that's probably a research gap. Thank you very much. We should do that in future. Yes.
Make a point. So there's someone in the U.S. that does research on this, and she looked at it under consumer protection laws.
You mean?
I don't know how it works in China because I don't know at all anything about the law.
I guess
But what she
in
does-
order to
what she looks at what you say, what you advertise on your website.
Yeah.
And then if you give false or misleading information, she looks at it from a consumer protection standpoint. So she looks at consumer protection laws.
But how can you measure the extent to which this affects
Again, I don't know
investors?
anything about consumer protection, but I think there are some laws that maybe can't
The
be
empirical studies set up their own variables, so there are actually a lot, I don't know how many there are in China, but there are a lot of studies, and each individual study will set up whatever their benchmarks are, and of course they have to state up front what those are. And there'll be criteria for the quality of the disclosure. And there are both quantitative and qualitative surveys that are being done.
Yeah, same way. I guess that's the way in which we can have a sense of the influence of this.
Well, our time, I think, is nearly over. I think it's not easy to audit the reliability of the CSR statement. That's necessary for the enforcement. You need some liability. Is there any information about testing or auditing the reliability?
You mean auditors?
Of auditors, yes.
The problem here is, as you can see, only less than 5%
Yeah,
of them actually have their
because of
reports
this
audited.
difficulty. Huh?
It's voluntary.
Yeah.
It's not a requirement that you have to audit your CSR reports.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an issue. So in many cases, actually, no auditor involved at all.
Thank you so much. Just one question.
Yes, the question raised by that gentleman was actually related to my question. My question was, you mentioned that in one of your previous empirical work shows no misrepresentation in relation to CSR, right? Okay. If that is the case, why is it that there's a need to reinforce enforcement in this regard, right? And the other one is, I was with him because from a regulator's perspective, right, there has to be some harm, tangible harm there to justify regulatory action, right? And so if we're not convinced that investors' interests or other parties' interests will be harmed by exaggerating, for example, our contribution, to, for example, our donation to charity, then why do we need this, this action?
Well, thank you very much for your comment. I will very briefly. Okay, you actually raised two questions. The first one is, is why we now need to reinforce.
If nobody does misrepresentation,
No. That's the actual cases. Okay, the cases involving misstatement of financial involvement, and that's exactly why we need to reinforce, because as you can see, this is a very serious problem, because those information disclosed in CSR report, widely said to be not very reliable. Apparently, there are many false or misleading information, and yet we haven't seen any cases in which those misstatements have led to legal liability. So that's why I think this is one area in which we should enforce enforcement. So that's the.
Does the exaggeration of your contribution, for example, do any good to the company? For example, attracting investment? Do they have empirical evidence? Why do they have incentive to do this?
Well, that's a very good question. We need to do more empirical study. That's back to your question. Now, for the second question, you say, this is a we need to solve this problem. Otherwise, we should not, for example, allow investors to claim damage or whatever. No, actually, even in relation to misstatement of financial information, we actually use the American innovation of fraud on the market theory, to justify there's a causation between the loss of investors and the misstatement. In fact, many investors simply do not read the prospectus and then just say, I bought your shares, in reliance on this perhaps is totally untrue. But nevertheless, we still allow them to seek damages or compensation from that. So this has the same
That's
problem.
America. We don't have.
That's American. All right. Okay. Let us see whether that issue. Okay.
Thank you very much again.
Okay. Thank you.